The winter had lasted 3 years. 3 years of endless snow, of ice that never melted, of a cold so deep it stripped bark from trees and left bones shining in the drifts. 3 years since the rivers had flowed, since sunlight had kissed the mountains. In the Frostpeak territory, wolves were dying, not from claws or rival packs, but from the cold itself. Pups froze beside their mothers. Warriors slept and never woke. Even the Alpha King's heartbeat had slowed, his once golden aura thinning into gray. And deep below that dying world, inside a half-collapsed cave no one remembered, a starving Omega lay awake. Her name was Lyra. Her ribs pressed sharp against her skin, her fur dull with frost, breath trembling out invisible ghosts. She hadn't eaten in 4 days. 5, maybe. Time blurred when you were starving. Her hands shook as she traced runes into the dirt with a fragment of bone. The bone belonged to her grandmother, the last of the moon magi. Forgotten magic, forgotten bloodline. Not forgotten child, the echo whispered in her skull. Just waiting. Lyra's lips cracked when she smiled. She had thought hunger had eaten even her hope. But the old words still glowed faintly under her touch, faint as starlight seen through storm clouds. The pack had cast her out a year ago. Too weak, too odd, too unwanted. Omegas weren't meant to speak to the moon, or to survive alone. But the Alpha King was dying now. And when the Alpha fell, the pack, even the ones who had spat at her, would crumble. The Frostpeak would vanish into history, nothing left but silence and snow. Her grandmother's prophecy had warned her of this night. When the moon bleeds thrice, and the sky forgets light, the one they cast out will carry the fire back to the king. Lyra had never understood it then. Now, the understanding hurt like hunger. The 3 red moons had already risen this season. The sky had forgotten light. It was time. She pushed herself upright, legs shaking from more than cold. Every movement was agony, frozen joints, hollow muscles, but beyond the mouth of the cave, the aurora flickered faint and sickly. It was a sign. The old rituals had rules. Only a moon magus could heal a pack's bond when the Alpha's heart faltered. But no magus lived anymore except her. A starving Omega no one believed had worth. Lyra pressed her palm to the frostbitten ground. The sigils pulsed once, twice, then steadied. "Grandmother," she whispered, voice breaking, "you said I would know when my light returned." The cold wind answered with silence. She closed her eyes, and under the dying sky, the first thread of moon magic reawakened in her veins, faint, silver, ancient. And for the first time in 3 years, the snow above her began to melt. The Frostpeak Mountains were a graveyard of ice. 3 winters ago, the sky had cracked open and poured nothing but snow. The blizzards never ceased. The rivers turned to glass, and the deer vanished. Even the wind lost its voice, moving over dead forests like a mourner over graves. No one remembered warmth anymore. The pups who'd been born since the freeze had never seen grass, only white stretching into white. At first, the pack fought the cold with discipline. Warriors hunted through waist-deep snow. Omegas packed ice into shelters and stoked fires until their fur burned. The Alpha King, Thuron Frostpeak, carried his dying wolves on his back and swore to the moon that he would not lose them. But vows mean little when the world itself turns against you. By the 3rd year, even Thuron's strength bent beneath starvation. His once silver eyes went dull. The mighty mountain dens became tombs where breath smoked briefly, then stopped. And still, the blizzards came. No predator prowled now. There was nothing left to hunt. The Omega dens were silent. The warriors' howls, once a nightly chorus across the cliffs, had quieted into scattered, hopeless echoes. Only the moon remained faithful, hovering pale, half-shrouded, watching. Sometimes crimson, sometimes full, sometimes almost gone. They said it changed color from hunger, reflecting the starving lives below. The old priestesses called it the bleeding moon. But the order of moon magi had been gone for generations, burned out of the pack for consorting with forbidden gods. So no one remembered how to speak to it anymore. Only one name still whispered through the frost, a ghost name, muttered by elders in half-belief: Lyra. The Omega who'd been cast from the pack for trying to wake the moon. The one they said had madness in her blood. Now, as snow swallowed the last hunting grounds and wolves grew too weak to dig their own graves, that name began to spread again. Quietly, desperately. Because the Alpha King was dying. He lay in the high den, breath shallow, coat dulled, surrounded by dwindling fires. Around his platform, healers chanted ritual songs, prayers more ancient than the language of command. But none of them could touch the freezing within him. The curse ate inward, patient and cruel. Not cold, the elders whispered, moon hunger. It was what came when a pack's bond to the moon itself began to fail, when no howl reached her and no light answered. Thuron's generals called it nonsense. They decreed more fires, more hunts, more deaths. But deep down, even they felt it, the silence between heartbeats widening, the bond between wolves thinning into nothing. They needed a magus, but none remained. In the third night of the season's longest storm, the moon lifted red behind a veil of black clouds. 3 times it rose that way, 3 times it bled. And somewhere in the mountains, far from the palace dens, beneath meters of snow, the curse stirred an old echo awake. The ice cracked, a cave long sealed whispered with faint, silver light. And a starving Omega, bones and breath and stubborn heartbeat, lifted her head to the moon for the first time in a year. The world was dying. She was dying. But something ancient had remembered her name. The cave had kept her alive, barely. A hollow in the ice, dark and airless, where wind howled through cracks like wolves mourning outside her grave. Every breath scraped her throat. Every heartbeat felt too loud. The cold had eaten the feeling from her fingers. Only pain remained, sharp as shards of the moon itself. Lyra sat against the rough wall, knees to her chest, ribs sharp as knives under her gray fur. Around her burned the faint ghost of a sigil, a circle carved from bone and salt. It hadn't flared for months. Now it pulsed weakly, in rhythm with her fatting pulse. 4 days without food, maybe 5, hard to tell anymore. Hunger had stolen time and shape. She held her grandmother's charm between trembling hands, a fragment of carved moonstone bound with torn leather. Once it had shone bright. Now it flickered like a dying ember. "Still here," she whispered to it, though her voice was barely a rasp. "Still waiting, just like you said." When she was still part of the pack, before they branded her Omega and sent her into exile, that same charm had glowed as she recited the old scripts. The Alpha's priests had called it witchcraft. The Beta Council said she mocked the moon. They called her madness moon fever. They didn't see her grandmother's blood in her veins, the last of the moon magi. The forgotten healers who once bound the bond between Alpha and pack, between life and winter. They drove her out at dawn, through falling snow, her hands bound, her runes burned. The last thing she saw before the gate slammed shut was the Alpha King's back. He hadn't turned once. Since then, silence had been her only companion. Silence and the whisper that didn't belong to the living. There will come a night when even kings kneel to the cold. On that night, your blood will remember its vow. Lyra never forgot that prophecy. Her grandmother's dying breath had burned it into her memory. But she hadn't known it meant this endless winter, this loneliness. Her body was a map of every hour of exile, frostbite tracing her hands, scars where old shackles had cut too deep. Her throat ached for the sound of howling, for belonging. She reached toward the cave mouth. It was sealed in white, ice over ice. No moon, no stars, just reflection, her own hollow face staring back. "Moon," she whispered, "if you've forgotten us too, then let it end." Nothing answered, only the sigh of snow shifting outside. Then a pulse through the ground, faint, steady, like a heartbeat echoing far below. The runes at her feet flickered. Her grandmother's charm warmed enough to sting her palm. A silver thread bled upward through the ice, thin as light through a crack. It reached her, touched her wrist, and her pulse jumped once more. She gasped. For the first time in months, warmth flickered in her chest. Weak, terrifying, alive. "Not forgotten," she said again, harsher this time. A statement, not a hope. She rose on shaking legs, swaying. Her bones felt hollow. Her blood whispered ancient syllables she didn't remember ever learning. Outside, the storm keened like something mourning. But under the sound, she heard it, the call of the pack, faint and panicked. The Alpha's wolves were dying. And against all reason, she felt the moon watching, waiting. Lyra pressed her hand to the charm against her heart. Her grandmother's voice, faint, fatting, murmured one last time. The one they cast out carries the fire back to the king. And Lyra, starving and forgotten, began to move toward the sound of the dying. The storm broke by inches as she walked. Wind shredded snow into glassy ribbons, tearing her face raw, but Lyra didn't stop. The world throbbed with faint light now, threads of silver running beneath the frost like buried veins. Each one pulsed when she stepped closer. The mountain itself remembered her bloodline. She followed the pulse until the ridge opened into a frozen plain. The world there was silent except for the faint, dying howls rolling down from the high dens, the Alpha's mountain. Her heart answered instinctively, a reflex she couldn't kill. The pack she swore to never need still lived somewhere above, crumbling piece by piece. She dragged her weight forward, one arm over her ribs, every step a consequence. Beneath her, the silver thread widened into a symbol she knew by heart, the mark of the forgotten moon. The last lesson her grandmother had taught her before priests burned their altar. Lyra sank to her knees before it. Moonlight condensed in memory, blood bound to bond, she whispered, reciting the forgotten invocation. May the heart that lost its name find voice again. The snow shuddered. The symbol flared pale blue, then white. Heat rippled across her palms. Starlight etched sigils into the ice, expanding outward until they formed a shining circle large enough to hold an army. She watched it unfold with the reverence of someone opening a grave. This was the old way. Not tricks, not heathen fire, not priestly chants. True moon magic, forgotten science, sacred anatomy of light and spirit. It had once bound the Alpha's life to the land's heartbeat. When that connection broke, so did the world's warmth. Her heart clenched with both awe and fury. They had called this blasphemy. The memory hit, raw and fast. Her grandmother's hands guiding hers, voice trembling as old runes burned around them. Every pack lives only as long as the bond holds. Never let them forget the language of light. She had let them forget. Or perhaps the world demanded lessons be relearned through ruin. Lyra reached into her tattered pouch and drew a strip of dried wolfsbane, one of the last plants that survived under frost. She crushed it, smeared it across her tongue. Bitter heat flared in her mouth. The herb burned her throat, waking something buried deeper than instinct, a connection. A door creaked open inside her mind. Images struck her at once. The Alpha King, motionless on his furs, his bond threads snapping like brittle wire. The pack scattered across the snowy dens, their spirits untethered and fatting. The bond had thinned to threads, glimmering faintly, about to break for good. She saw it, the linkage, the precise geometry of the moon's heart to the Alpha's core. Broken, empty. But she could fix it. Only her bloodline remembered how. The knowledge came like muscle memory, her grandmother's lectures reforming through pain. The moon arteries, the triune sigils of restoration, the sacrifice sequence. Every formula precise, exact, forgotten by all but one. This was the secret she carried through exile. Not madness, not heresy, the blueprint of life itself. Her knees buckled. She fell forward, cheeks striking the ice, breath fogging against the glowing symbol. She whispered to the storm. They burned the Magi to silence the moon's voice, but I was listening. The sigil pulsed once, syncing with her heartbeat. Silver light crawled up her arms, cutting through her veins in thin, glowing lines. Knowledge had answered. The world wouldn't yet. Not until she climbed the mountain. Not until she faced the king who had cast her out and proved what the forgotten still remembered. She lifted her gaze toward the peak, where the Frost Peak Palace shone faint beneath the storm. For the first time, her fear melted. "Wait for me, my king," she whispered. "Your bond is not yet broken." And with the light of the buried moon flickering under her skin, Lyra began her climb toward the dying throne. The climb bled her dry. The mountain rose like a blade into the clouds, ice ridges polished smooth by wind, cliffs that swallowed screams whole. Her hands tore open on stone. Her feet slipped on frost that felt older than memory. Still, she climbed. The light under her skin burned low but constant, guiding her like a heartbeat she no longer owned. Halfway up, a storm shifted. For the briefest breath, the gray broke and the moon showed her face. Thin, red, watching. Lyra froze. The world fell quiet except for her pulse. Her breath steamed in front of her face, trembling. Her grandmother's charm, now dull from years of wear, grew warm against her skin. Then the whisper came soft, but everywhere at once. "You climb the same path I died upon." Lyra's breath caught. She knew that voice. Grandmother. The air thickened, cold folding into warmth, warmth folding into memory. And out of the moonlight, through the swirling snow, the faint outline of an old woman appeared. Her shape wasn't entirely human or wolf, half shadow, half radiance, the magus of the last crescent. Her grandmother smiled, or something like it, a curve of light shaped like love and warning. The bond was severed by arrogance, the spirit said, by those who thought they could command what was meant to be served. Lyra's throat ached. They burned you for saving them. And they will burn you too. The words didn't carry cruelty, only truth. But the ghost stepped closer, gaze lowering to Lyra's blistered hands. "Still, you climb." "I can't stop," Lyra whispered. "The Alpha's bond is breaking. The pack's heartbeat is fatting. If it dies, we all do. Then learn what I could not teach in time." The phantom's hand lifted. A silver thread reached out and touched Lyra's forehead. The world shuddered, visions splitting open into constellations of light. Images flooded her. The sacred geometry of the moon's lattice circling the world, river-thin channels connecting every living wolf to their Alpha's spirit. She saw where the bond had broken, a single fracture, running from the king's heart to the moon's reflection. "He blocked her voice," her grandmother said. "He chose command over connection, and command cannot sustain life." Lyra's chest constricted. "Then his death is his doing." "No, his repentance must be yours." The ghost stepped closer, eyes luminous. "Magic without forgiveness is only control. Heal him not because he deserves it, but because your mercy will break what pride built." The words carved deep, too deep. Lyra bowed her head, tears freezing before they could fall. "You always said the moon answers only the humble, but she hasn't answered me." Her grandmother leaned forward, the warmth of nothing brushing her cheek. "Then speak louder." The apparition began to fade, dissolving into 1,000 drifting motes of light. When the storm howls for silence, become the howl. And then she was gone. The mountain groaned around her as if it mourned. The glow under Lyra's skin dimmed, steadied, then burned brighter than before, as if the ghost had rekindled each vein with purpose. She climbed again, faster now, firmer, her resolve overriding hunger. The words of prophecy echoed in her every step. The one they cast out will carry the fire back to the king. Snow swallowed her figure as she disappeared into the storm. But where she walked, the wind bent and the moonlight followed. The mentor was dead. But her lessons lived, burning in her granddaughter's blood, waiting for redemption at the summit. The first sound to pierce the snowstorm was a howl, hoarse, broken, and not from joy. Lyra froze near the base cliffs of Frost Peak Hold. The sound came again, closer this time, a chorus unraveling into panic, wolves calling to fallen kin. Then silence, the kind that follows death. She pressed herself against the ice wall, chest tight. Her claws bit into the frost for anchor. Beneath the solid white mountain, faint vibrations rolled under her palms, heartbeats out of rhythm. The pack's soul beat, once steady as thunder, was staggering. It was happening. The Alpha's pulse was breaking. Her grandmother's voice pulsed faintly through memory. "When the heart of the king weakens, so weakens the pack. The moon's tether dies with him." Lyra looked toward the fortress above, spired ice halls jutting like frozen ribs against the bleeding sky. Gold banners hung limp, Their crests rhymed with frost. Beyond those walls lay everything that had cast her out. The council that mocked her, the warriors who spat at her name, the king who couldn't look her in the eye as they exiled her. Now he was dying. Now they were all dying. And she, starving, shaking, forgotten, was the only one left who remembered how to stop it. She should have laughed. Instead, she started walking. Every step toward the fortress was defiance carved into the snow. The spirits stirred in the wind, wolf shapes twisting from frost, watching her pass. The old moon paths, half visible now, wove under her feet like veins leading home. Halfway across the plateau, she saw them, a patrol of royal sentinels, dark shapes against the storm. Their pelts carried the king's mark, but their eyes were hollowed by hunger. They hadn't seen her yet. She lifted her hood, hiding the light crawling faint beneath her throat. Then the wind changed, and her scent carried. "Who goes?" One of them barked, a male with glazed eyes and cracked armor. His spear glittered with rime. Lyra didn't answer at first. Tremors ran through her arms, both from cold and from the sudden, suffocating fear of recognition. "I said who." "I'm here for the Alpha," she managed, her voice rough but steady. The sentinels stilled. One stepped forward, disbelief breaking across his face as the snow cleared enough to show hers. "Omega," his voice curdled with scorn. "No, you were banished." Thunder cracked somewhere above, or maybe it was the Alpha's dying breath shaking through the ridge. Lyra stood her ground. "Your king won't live till dawn if I stay away." The wolves bristled, trading glances between rage and fear. It was the second one, younger Leaner, who broke first. "You think you can heal him?" he spat. "You're a curse, girl. The moon turned her back when she made you." Lyra's stomach twisted. But behind the insult, she felt something break open, the same silence that followed every cruelty, disbelief masking dread. They were out of answers. Another pulse rippled underfoot. The snow nearest the fortress cracked, and faint silver light bled through. It drew their eyes wide, unsure. "That's Moonfire," whispered the youngest guard. But the priestess said. "There is no priestess," Lyra said, louder now. The wind folded around her words, carrying them toward the gates. "Only me." Her grandmother's charm burned hot against her chest, as if in applause for the defiance. Lightning flashed. For an instant her eyes reflected silver, not fully human, not wolf, something between. "Take me to the king," she said softly, "or lose him forever." The guards hesitated, conflict coiling between faith and fear. Then from somewhere above, a single horn sounded low and broken. The death call. The king's pulse had stopped. Lyra looked up toward the palace ridge, her breath turning to fire in her chest. This was her summons, the moment the moon had waited for. She stepped past the speechless guards and into the storm, whispering through her teeth. "Now you'll remember what you chose to forget." Snow spiraled in her wake, silver now, not white. The moon was awake. The gates of Frost Peak Hold loomed like the teeth of some ancient beast, iron crusted with ice, flanked by two statues of dead kings. Beyond them, the last firelight of the pack flickered weakly, half smothered by the wind. The guards had led Lyra this far in silence, distrust trailing them like ghosts. Now they stopped at the threshold. The younger one who'd spoken before glanced back at her, at the ragged Omega wrapped in threadbare rags, frost-bitten hands clasped tight over a dull moonstone. He looked ready to laugh, but couldn't find the courage. "You understand what'll happen if the council sees you," he muttered. "They'll kill you before you reach the court." "Then make sure I reach it first," Lyra said. Her tone was steady, steadier than she felt. The moon's pulse still thudded faint in her chest, urging her forward. The gates groaned open. Inside, the great hall was nothing but echoes and cold. Wolves huddled around fire pits gone to ash. Priests murmured over bowls of black water. The banners hung in tatters, the crest half swallowed by frost. At the far end, upon a raised stone dais, the Alpha King lay motionless beneath furs. Lyra's knees almost gave out at the sight. Even collapsed, he looked impossibly strong and impossibly far from her world. The high priest turned as she entered, his robes stiff with ice. Who dares disturb? His eyes froze when he saw her. By the goddess, the exile. A ripple of whispers coursed through the hall. Omega, heretic, outcast. Lyra's voice barely carried over them. He's not dying of cold. It's the bond. The moon's tether is broken. Laughter cut her words apart, sharp, bitter, hollow. It came from the priest, but others followed, eager to release their fear into mockery. The tether, he sneered. You think your kind speaks for the moon. I don't think I know. She pushed forward, barefoot on freezing stone, the runes under her skin flickering faint beneath the dirt. He's fatting because he severed her voice. Your prayers can't reach her, but mine can. The priest's smile fell to a grimace. You dare bring your cursed tongue into this hall. Guards. No, the voice that stopped him was cracked but still commanding. The king. He shifted weakly on his bed of furs, eyes half open. Let her speak. The hall went as still as stone. Lyra's heart jolted once, hard enough to hurt. She seeks to cheat you with the same heresy that cast her out, the priest said carefully, but she saw fear under his authority now. She is no healer. She is what happens when the moon turns cruel. Lyra met the king's gaze. Cruelty isn't forgetting, she said softly. It's being forgotten. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the priest snapped his fingers. Enough. Guards stepped forward, spears drawn. The nearest one sneered down at her. We should have left you to the snow, Omega. Lyra didn't flinch. You'll wish you had when the mountain finally stops breathing. They laughed, sharp and ugly. The alpha's breath rasped once more, then fell into silence. Panic rippled through the court, fear smothered the mockery. She turned toward the dais, meeting the king's faint, disbelieving stare. Take me to him, she said, voice rising above the chaos. Or bury him. No one moved. Then the wind howled through the broken gates, silver, cold, and full of moonlight. It wrapped around her feet as if choosing sides. Even the priest went silent. For the first time, doubt entered their eyes. And the storm whispered the truth. The outcast had been heard. The priest's chants faltered under the storm's roar. The shimmer of moonlight at Lyra's feet crawled upward, weaving across the stones until it kissed the dais where the alpha lay. The high doors slammed shut behind her with a groan. It was just her, the trembling guards, the council, and the dying king. Thuron's eyes opened fully for the first time. Once bright silver, they were now dusted with gray. He studied the Omega standing where no exile should stand, frostbite painting her lips blue, dirt streaking her face, and yet there was that impossible glow threading her veins. Come forward, he said, his voice dry stone breaking. The priest hissed, My king. I said forward. Lyra climbed the steps, stopping just short of his reach. Her pulse thundered. The scent of sickness, frost, and dying magic hung around him heavy and old. She bowed her head. The moon still listens, my king, but not to prayer, to blood. The priest laughed bitterly. Sacrilege. Lyra's gaze cut to him. Truth. Thuron's hand twitched, the faintest sign of command. The guards held their ground but lowered their weapons. If you fail, he said, voice weak but steady, your death will be quick. Do you accept that? She nodded. Death is a luxury I've already made peace with. A line passed between them then, a tether neither fully understood, born of exhaustion and defiance both. He studied her another breath. You have one night, girl, one. If dawn comes and I still draw this useless breath, they'll burn you for false hope. Then I must not fail. His lips quirked faintly, something like a ghost of respect. Permission granted. The priest recoiled. My king. Enough, Thuron said, sharper now, cutting into silence. His gaze found hers again. You'll work in the southern moon court. I will grant you one assistant, a healer to watch. If your rites are real, save us. If not, the dawn fire is yours. She inclined her head. Then let the moon be witness. The guards led her from the throne, whispering to one another, unsure who terrified them more, the dying king or the woman who glowed where snow tried to cling. Behind her, the storm broke open above the mountain, red light from the bleeding moon spilling through the cracks in the ice roof. The old magic was awake, and it had just been given permission to breathe. The southern moon court hadn't been used in a century. It smelled of dust, ash, and language forgotten. Lyra stood alone in its circular hall, her fingers tracing the shallow engravings on the floor, sigils carved into marble long before the current dynasty. They pulsed faintly under her touch, fragments of what once bound wolf and moon together. She unpacked her meager satchel. Bone shards, dried herbs that hummed faintly under her breath, and 3 vials of melted snow she had gathered from the cave where the first symbol had awakened. Every motion became a prayer, not of kneeling, but of knowing. Frostroot for the tether, wolfsbane to test will, fire lilac for light's return, she murmured. The rhythm steadied her tremors. The scent of crushed herbs rose like memory. Her fingers brushed the moonstone at her neck. If you can see me, grandmother, she whispered, guide my hands. I do this for them even after what they did to me. A gust of wind swept through the hall, though no window was open. The runes at the edges flared blue in response. Somewhere overhead, footsteps echoed. She looked up to find a silhouette in the archway, the soldier who had escorted her earlier. You again, she said cautiously. He stepped into the light, tall, pale, spectral-eyed, but not cruel. Orders, I'm to assist you until dawn. My name's Kale. She nodded once, then helped me form the circle. He hesitated. You're serious? She met his gaze. Ask the dead if they think I'm joking. That stripped the protest from him. Wordlessly, Kale knelt, helping her rearrange the stones, tracing sigils with a soldier's steadiness. The rhythm between them was strange, reverent, and efficient. For the first time, no mockery haunted her work. As she arranged the final bones into a crescent, Kale asked quietly, You really think the moon remembers us? Lyra's voice softened. She never forgets, we forget her. That's why the world froze. He stared at her like she'd stared at her grandmother once, doubtful, but wanting to believe. When the circle was complete, Lyra pressed her bloodied palm to its center. The sigils pulsed once, twice, then flared to life, light chasing the dust into corners. Now, she murmured, strength trembling in her voice, we wait for moonrise. Outside, thunder cracked again. The light from the ceiling split into 12 beams, cascading over the court, igniting silver fire at each cardinal point. The air grew warm. After 3 years, warm. Lyra smiled faintly through exhaustion. She's listening. Night deepened. The ritual circle glowed steady now, humming like a heartbeat. Lyra sat slumped beside it, fatigue pulling at every tendon. Kale had gone quiet, sitting opposite her, watching her blood soak the runes she carved. Then a presence filled the doorway. She turned and froze. The Alpha King stood there. He was thinner than rumor, wrapped in a cloak against weakness, but still radiating that impossible gravity, command forged into bone. 2 guards lingered behind, uncertain. He dismissed them with a glance. They obeyed. Only he and the Omega remained. I expected a witch's den, Thuron rasped, stepping closer. Instead, I find a tomb waking. Lyra bowed her head slightly. The moon asked for quiet places, power like silence. He circled the edge of the glowing sigils, gaze moving over the runes, the herbs, the bones. We burned these once, he said softly. My ancestors believed this ritual's power made the Magi arrogant. They burned your salvation because they feared its source. He looked at her then, truly looked. You speak to me without fear. She met his eyes. You already took everything from me. What's left to fear? Silence stretched. For a heartbeat, the brittle arrogance of hierarchy fell away. He seemed human. Thuron crouched, studying the circle beside her. Your blood fuels this. Yes. Then it costs you. Yes. He ran a palm along the edge of a glowing mark. His voice grew quieter. My people are dying, Omega. My heir among them. Lyra dared to answer. Then give me what your ancestors never gave mine, trust. He exhaled through cracked lips. Trust is a luxury, not a gift. Trust, she said, eyes glinting with cold fire, is the only thing that can still save you. Something shifted in him. Slowly, He unwrapped the clasp around his wrist and placed it in her palm, a small silver insignia marked with his own blood seal. "Then I trust you for a night," he said, "but if you lie, I don't know how anymore." He nodded once, almost to himself. The faintest flicker of warmth crossed his expression. "Do what you must." Lyra's throat tightened. "You should rest." "I haven't rested in 3 years." He paused, gaze holding her fast. "Perhaps this will let me." He turned to leave, but before vanishing through the archway, he stopped and said softly, "My name before titles is Thuron." The door closed behind him, silent but heavy. For the first time, the Alpha King had introduced himself to an Omega. The moon blazed brighter overhead. By dawn's approach, word had spread. The exile was summoning the moon. The courtyard filled with wolves, wary, hungry, broken. The priests circled warily near the edges, disbelief shielding their fear. Above them, the red moon hovered swollen, bleeding its last light into the frost. Lyra stood in the center of the great court, dressed in nothing but a cloak of woven shadow and ice. The ritual circle from the night before had been redrawn larger, 20 paces wide, exact to the rune. Thuron stood at its edge, leaning against Kale's shoulder for balance. He looked worse, skin thin as parchment, but his eyes burned silver again. Lyra met his gaze and nodded once. She began. Her voice rose low, ancient words that cracked through the silence like rising storm. The old language of the moon magi scraped raw against the walls. Her blood flowed freely, dripping into the snow. Each drop flared into light. The runes came alive, one after another, forming a ring that spun around her in widening crescents. Gasps rippled through the watching packs. Some fell to their knees, others turned away, afraid to see her become what they'd condemned. The priests shouted blasphemy, but the wind drowned them out. Thuron gripped the rail with both hands, eyes locked on her. She lifted the moonstone high above her head. "Hear me, forgotten mother," she cried. "Your children are dying in silence. Remember us as we once remembered you." The moon flared white, slicing through red cloud. The courtyard blazed in light so pure it erased every shadow. The wolves howled, instinctive, unplanned, their voices merging into a single sound that made the frost tremble. Then came the pull. The ritual's core turned inward, light spiraling down toward her chest. She staggered, screaming, silver bleeding from her nose and fingertips. The energy needed a vessel. It wanted flesh, not air. Thuron lurched forward, shouting her name, but Kale held him back. "She has to finish it." The ground shook. Ice cracked across the courtyard, revealing molten veins of light beneath. The moon herself seemed to reach through, seeking reconnection. One final phrase burned in Lyra's throat. She shouted it through shattering pain, voice echoing through every wolf's blood. Heart to heart, bond unbroken. A wave exploded outward, white fire chasing the blizzard from the mountain. Wolves fell back, covering their eyes. And Lyra collapsed into silence. The moon flickered once, twice, then steadied white again, unstained. The world exhaled warmth for the first time in 3 years. The king's breath returned. "Lyra." Thuron was the first to reach her. He fell to his knees beside her motionless body, cupping her frost-burned face. Her skin glowed faintly, veins filled with light instead of blood. She wasn't breathing. The circle still pulsed, alive, hungry, feeding off what little was left of her spirit. The priests shouted for the ritual to end, but none of them dared step closer. The air burned around her body, radiant heat rolling from her sacrifice. "She gave too much," Kale whispered. Thuron shook his head. No, she gave enough. Fury and grief twisted together inside him. He laid his palm over her heart, feeling the faint ghost of pulse beneath cracked ribs. The old magi symbols he'd once called heresy were etched into her arms, alive. "She's the conduit," he murmured. "The bridge." The runes flickered wildly, threatening collapse. He knew instinctively, if the circle broke now, the bond would break again. He did something no Alpha had done in centuries. He bowed. Leaning over her prone form, He pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "If pride built the wall, let me fall to tear it down." The moon answered. Light roared through the court, engulfing both of them. The runes flamed gold-struck silver, spiraling high into the clouds. Wolves cried out and covered their eyes as warmth rolled through the snow, melting what had buried them for 3 years. For a heartbeat, all of Frostpeak glowed. Then silence fell. When the smoke cleared, the king still knelt alive. But Lyra lay limp in his arms, her eyes closed, her skin pale as ash. The sigils on her hands dimmed to nothing. "She's gone," someone whispered. Thuron didn't answer. He gathered her tighter, ignoring the burns searing his skin from her magic's residue. His voice broke against her ear. "You were never nothing." A single tear cut through frost on his cheek, steaming as it fell upon hers. The moon shimmered faintly overhead, not white now, but silver with threads of dawn gold. Then warmth spread again. Her lips parted, a breath faint but real slipped free. Thuron froze, pulse hammering. The moon had remembered mercy. 7 days of sunlight. When Lyra opened her eyes, she didn't recognize the world. Streaming light poured through high windows of stone. Air warm enough to sting filled her lungs. The scent of fresh pine and thawed earth flooded her senses. She lay on a pallet piled with fur and silver thread blankets. Her hands were clean, the sigils faded into faint, scar-like etchings. Her chest still ached from whatever force had passed through her, but the pain was alive, familiar. "Welcome back." Kale's voice soft. He leaned against the doorway, half smiling, sleep-starved but alive. "You didn't move for days," he said. "The king hasn't left this wing since." Her breath caught. "He lives." Kale nodded, eyes bright. "Lives, walks, commands." The moon burned the frost from his veins. The pack's heart beats again. He grinned, weary but genuine. "You're doing." Before she could answer, the door opened behind him. Thuron entered. Sunlight fell across his face. Color returned to skin and eyes. He seemed taller now, or perhaps she was smaller. He carried no cloak, only the simple leather of renewal rites, his silver insignia tied around his wrist again. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "The world woke with you." She swallowed against a raw throat. "It wasn't me, it was the moon." He stepped closer. The moon needed a voice. His gaze softened, rare warmth breaking through the old severity. "You gave her mine again." Her eyes stung. The words she'd waited years to hear, not dismissal, not pity, acknowledgement. Outside, laughter echoed faint through the courts, pups chasing one another over bare dirt for the first time in years. Lyra looked toward the light filtering through melting ice and whispered, "It's warm." "I'd forgotten what warmth felt like," he said. Their silence wasn't empty, it was rest. That evening, the entire pack gathered in the central hall. For the first time in living memory, torches burned without freezing out. Wolves of every rank filled the chamber. Warriors, healers, omegas, pups, elders. Their howls had turned from mourning to devotion. Yet as Lyra entered under Kale's escort, the crowd went breathless with disbelief. Thuron stood at the dais, no longer dying but painfully alive. He turned to face them, his voice ringing like metal striking light. 3 years of night ended not by my hand, nor by the priests, nor by strength of bloodline, he said, but by the one we cast out. Whispers surged, confused and reverent. Thuron raised his palm. Lyra, daughter of the moon Magus, exile, heretic, survivor, saved every soul in this mountain. She carried the bond none of us remembered and gave her life to mend it. He looked directly at her, the weight of his words pouring into still air. She was starving when we left her, yet she fed the moon with her light. She was mocked as cursed, yet through her curse the bond was reborn. She was forgotten, but she remembered us. Lyra shook under the sound of 1,000 eyes turning toward her. Tears blurred her vision. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Thuron descended the dais, coming to stand before her. He removed his insignia once more, the same token she had carried through the night, and looped it around her neck. No Alpha lives without an Omega, he declared, and no Alpha King stands without the one who found the moon's favor. He bowed, the Alpha King, bowing to the lowest of his kind. Gasps spread through the hall. Then one by one, wolves dropped to their knees. The priest who once mocked her wept without disguise. Lyra's voice finally returned, a whisper breaking into sunlight. I only remembered what you taught me to forget. Thuron smiled faintly, and will never forget again. Night returned, but it was gentle now, the first peaceful darkness in years. Lyra stood on the balcony overlooking thawed forests, moonlight painting her hair in silver. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn. I should be thanking you, Thuron said quietly, yet every word I find feels small. You already thanked me, she murmured. You let me back into the light. He stepped beside her, eyes reflecting the healed moon. When I touched your mind during the ritual, I saw what you carried: hunger, exile, hope that refused to die. You weren't just saving me. You were saving them all from what I'd become. She swallowed hard. You couldn't have known. I should have. An alpha who forgets his weakest is already cursed. She looked at him at last. Then remember this, always salvation doesn't start from above. It starts from the ground, from the ones you step over. He smiled then, small and warm, the kind that made him look like the boy he must have once been. Then let me step beside you instead. Lyra blinked at him. What are you saying? He reached out, clasped her trembling hand, and turned it palm up. The silvery burn of the ritual still marked her skin, a crescent intertwined with the king's sigil. It burned into us both, he said. A mark of balance. The moon doesn't bind two souls without purpose. Her heart stumbled. That's not. It is, he said softly. Mate bond, forged in fire and faith, not by hierarchy, by choice. The night stilled around them, the wind holding its breath. I don't deserve that, she whispered. Thuron's fingers tightened. Everything in me says you do. The words detonated quietly in the cold air. Tears gathered in her lashes, but she didn't look away. The moon above brightened, her light sliding down his jaw, across her skin, wrapping them both in the same glow that had melted a world. When she finally nodded, he exhaled, something breaking loose in him, free at last. Lyra leaned her forehead against his. Their bond flared faint in silver between them, neither command nor surrender, just recognition. Below, the pack howled once more, not in grief this time, but in worship of life. The storm had ended, not through dominance, not through prayer, through remembrance. And beneath a healed moon, the outcast Omega became the Alpha King's equal. Dawn rose gold over the frost peak, a color unseen for years. The last snow sank quietly into thawing soil, and the air smelled of pine and renewal. The pack gathered once more before the great hall, thousands filling the terraces and cliffs. The coronation floor, the one that had seen centuries of cold, command, and blood, gleamed with water instead of frost. For the first time, the moon's chosen and the Alpha's heir would rise together. Lyra stood behind the hall's carved doors, fingers trembling against the soft linen robe Kale had pressed into her hands earlier. It was spun silver gray, simple but alive with faint luminescence, woven by the same symbols she'd carved during the ritual. Her reflection stared back from a polished plate of bronze, a woman no longer hollow, no longer starving, still scarred, but radiant. The doors opened. Drums rumbled like awakening thunder. Thuron waited at the far end of the marble aisle, flanked by the council who had once sneered at her. All now wore the moon's crescent stitched at their throats, the mark she had restored. He was dressed not in gold, but snow-white fur and a silver mantle edged with her runes. She walked toward him, each step measured, caught in the eyes of thousands. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some bowed, others wept, many simply watched in reverence. When she reached him, Thuron extended his hand. She hesitated, memory of exile flashing through her, but he bowed his head, breaking the old order again. Lyra of the Magi, he announced, voice carrying over the mountains. You were cast down by fear, and in silence you saved us. You were forgotten by kings, yet remembered by gods. From this day until night returns, you will walk beside me as my equal, protector of bond and keeper of the moon." He turned toward the council. "Let her name be written as Luna Healer, first of the reborn Magi." The title struck through the crowd like a heartbeat. Luna, moon reborn in flesh. Thuron slipped a silver circlet around her head, the same light that once scarred her now crowning her instead. The wolves below howled together, the sound echoing for miles across the thawed forests. Tears blurred Lyra's sight. She turned to face them, the warmth of living eyes washing over her like sunlight. Her heart shook beneath the weight of everything she'd once been denied. 3 years of winter taught us forgetting is death, she said softly, though the wind carried her words. So long as I breathe, we will remember. Thuron's hand found hers again, not guiding, not leading, simply holding. For the first time in memory, the king did not stand alone at dawn. Months passed, and the world healed. The snows retreated, revealing rivers that sang again. Trees budded strong, wolves hunted freely, pups learned the sound of water instead of wind. At the mountain's base, near the cave where her exile had begun, a new structure rose, built from both stone and memory. Its windows faced moonrise. Its walls were inscribed in the old language, the one they had burned. The school of the old ways. Lyra walked among its halls as apprentices, young, trembling, stubborn, repeated the incantations once whispered in fear. Some were Omegas who'd been overlooked. Others were warriors whose bloodlines once mocked the Magi. All were equal here. She paused as a little one stumbled through a rune and pouted. "The lines don't want to listen." "They never do at first," she said, kneeling beside him. "Magic listens to patience, not pride." He tried again. The mark glowed faintly, stubborn light finding faith. Lyra smiled, heart swelling. Thuron's footsteps sounded behind her. He leaned against the archway, dressed in travel leathers, a faint smirk softening his features. "You've turned my soldiers into sorcerers." She glanced back. "You said the pack must never forget again." "And they won't," he said quietly. His gaze swept the room, the laughter, the sparks of light. "You gave them more than memory, Lyra. You gave them meaning." She stood, brushing dust from her hands. "Meaning means little unless passed forward." He moved to her side, watching as the apprentices lit another circle. "One day, they'll teach those beyond Frostpeak. The moon's voice will travel again." Lyra nodded. "That's what the Magi were meant to do, carry light, not hoard it." Outside, the bell tolled noon. The valley shimmered under full sunlight. Wolves worked, laughed, lived. The pack that survived winter had turned its pain into something new. Thuron reached for her hand, brushing calloused fingers over hers. "We once lived by command," he said. "Now we live by connection. That's your legacy." She turned toward him, smiling softly. "Ours." Then she lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the first apprentices of distant packs were already climbing toward Frostpeak, drawn by word of the moon healer. The world was no longer dying. It was learning. Winter returned, as all seasons must, but when it came gently. Snow draped the mountains in silk instead of shroud. Wolves ran beneath it laughing, not starving. Fires burned bright through the night, their smoke curling toward a sky unafraid of cloud. Lyra stood once more in her old cave, the same hollow that had once been her tomb. Now, flowers sprouted along its mouth. The sigil she had carved in her starving days glowed faintly under the snow, alive with pulse. Her breath fogged the air, but warmth flowed into it, not pain. Thuron joined her silently, setting down a basket of moonstones polished by the apprentices, their offering for the solstice night. They knelt together, arranging the stones in the same crescent spiral she had drawn by bone all those years ago. "Still beautiful," he murmured. She smiled softly. "The same, just no longer cruel." The moon rose full above them, her reflection mirrored in their joined hands. The same light that once froze them now wrapped the cave in gentle gold. "How strange," Lyra said quietly, "to end where we began." "Not strange," he answered. "It means we close the circle." She rested her head against his shoulder, the silence around them deep but peaceful. When she first spoke to me, I thought she wanted obedience, but it was never that. What then? She wanted remembrance. The wind moved through the valley, carrying the laughter of pups and the hymn of wolves howling under the moon, not in fear this time, but gratitude. Thuron exhaled, voice barely a whisper. She hears them. She always did, Lyra said. They watched as the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, harmless. The world shimmered white once more, but not frozen, living. The wound that had begun with winter had closed in its same embrace. Thuron turned to her. And you? I'm home. The moon hung bright above the reborn world, her light cresting over the ridge of Frost Peak as it once had 3 years before. But this time, no suffering echoed, only peace. Lyra brushed a finger over the glowing rune in the snow and whispered the words that had started it all. The one they cast out will carry the fire back to the king. And beside her, the king, once lost, once dying, smiled as their breath met the cold air together. The fire was home again. The bond unbroken. The world remembers those we tried to forget. If you felt her story burn in your chest, don't let it end here. Like, share, and spread the word of the moon healer. Let others remember the power we bury when we silence the weak.